Okay, so last class we were talking about social engineering. We introduced the idea. We talked a little bit about it. I gave you an example with a video of a social engineering attack. And I mentioned that there's this sort of framework. It mainly comes from the book Art of Human Hacking. I tweaked it a little bit because I tried to streamline it a little bit more than it was originally. So in the kind of streamlined version of the framework, we're going to break social engineering attacks into three components. Most of them have all three components. It's possible that maybe you only have two of the three components. So the first will be some sort of information gathering. So it's hard to do a social engineering attack if you don't know what you're doing. The second will be a pretext. So a pretext is a fancy way of saying that one of the components will be that you're going to pretend to be someone that you're not. Okay, and so that's called a pretext. That's your pretext. Okay, so in the video from last class, someone pretended to be a bank employee. He was not. Someone pretended to be the bank call center. He was not. Okay, so those are pretexts. And then the final thing is, so information gathering will kind of feed into your pretext. You'll do a better pretext if you do some information gathering first. You'll be able to pull it off more convincingly. And the end goal isn't to get someone to believe that you're a bank employee, right? That's a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. The goal is that ultimately you want to get something from this person. Okay, so you're using the pretext to get something, but then you want to actually get that. Okay, and usually you can think of one of two things. So one is you're persuading someone to do something, and we might as well just say something that they shouldn't do. Okay, if they should do it, then you wouldn't have to bother with the whole pretext. Okay, so you're going to persuade someone to break protocol, for example, for you in order to get something that you want. Or the other case is that you're trying to get some information from them. So that's called elicitation. Okay, and so persuasion and elicitation are both forms of influence. There may be slightly different in terms of the different techniques or approaches that you can use. So we'll go through those. So what we'll do this class is I'll give you lots of information about each of these stages. And then I'll just sort of tell you a bunch of stories about social engineering attacks and convince you, hopefully, that these are very real, persuasive attacks. It's a main vector today for attacking systems. It's not always end-to-end a social engineering attack. So the social engineering might just get your kind of foot in the door, and then it might turn over to a technical attack after that. But social engineering is something that you have to pay attention to as a security person. So let me give you a bit of those motivating factors, and then we'll jump into information gathering. So the first thing is it's very prevalent. Yep.
So sorry, sir. Can
No.
you repeat once again the persuasion and elicitation?
Yeah. So persuasion is I want you to do something for me. So I want access to the server room. So I'm pretending to be an IT person. I want access to it, so I'm persuading you to give me access. Elicitation would be I want some information from you. I want to know what your password is, for example. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay, so the motivating factors are it's a very prevalent form of attack. It's not covered a lot, so there's not a lot of security courses that cover it, even though it's like one of the most prevalent today forms of attack, and yet it's one of the least well covered, I would say, in most security courses. And maybe it's because it's sort of hard to teach. It's not like technical, and there's not protocols and things that are involved. But anyways, with this framework, it will make it a little more technical. The goal here is that you have to understand how you're going to get attacked, and then you can think about defending yourself. So this section is really focused on the attacks themselves and less on the defenses, although we will talk about defenses a little bit. There is a job that you can get. One job that you could get is like a penetration tester. And so that's usually a technical job. But now there's social engineering pen testing. So there's not like a million jobs in that space, but people do hire people who are good at social engineering to actually go into a firm. The firm will hire them sort of like a red team to try and test out how far an attacker can get infiltrating the company. And social engineering will be one of the approaches that they use. The final thing I'll note very fervently is that social engineering attacks are almost always illegal. Okay, so it's something to bear in mind. You're going to learn a bunch of techniques. Don't go out and use them in the real world. Even when they're not illegal, they're almost always sort of unethical. So you'll learn about ethics in that last lecture. But okay, so it might sound kind of fun, but anyways. Okay, so let's go through the different steps of the framework. So the first one's information gathering. Okay, so the idea of information gathering is you have some target of your attack. Okay, so the target might be a firm, a company, something like that. And the idea is that you want to learn as much about that company as possible. In particular, if you're going to use a pretext, it's going to help you. So let's say your pretext is you're going to be an IT person, you're going to walk in. You should know everything about what IT company they actually use. Right, if it's an external company, you should look like an IT person, not just an IT person, but an IT person from that company. Right, you should have a uniform that matches maybe the logo of that company. You should know where you're going. Right, what desk do you go to? It would be good if you knew where the server room was, so you could sort of point at it. If you know names of people that are there, that helps you. You can, make small chat with, say, the administrator that either is going to grant you access or not. And if you go in and you sort of know some facts about the company and the people that work there, then it's going to seem like you are the sort of normal IT person who comes on a regular basis. Okay, it won't seem like you're some stranger who has never been in that company before and doesn't even, in fact, work for the company as well. Okay, so in order to pull off a convincing pretext, you have to gather some information. Okay, how do you do information gathering? Well, there's lots of different approaches that you can do. The first thing that's the easiest thing to do is just start with the web. So you can do web searches. So a website like LinkedIn is good. It will usually give you names of employees, their positions. You can figure out who what the organization chart looks like, who's the managers, who are the bosses, that kind of thing. Any kind of social networking also is good. So Twitter, Facebook, that kind of thing. Etc. To automate this, there are some tools. So there's one called Multigo, which is a tool that just basically automates the scraping of a bunch of web servers for you. So you sort of point it at an anchor, which might be an email address of someone, and it will search all sorts of different websites and things like that and try and find information about any information that's affiliated with that particular email account or that particular name or whatever it is. And then as you pull in other people, then you can scrape on those people and you can sort of build a little chart of people. Another thing that I mentioned is sometimes at a certain point, you want to start guessing passwords to accounts. And sometimes people use passwords that are specific to their actual job. So one thing you can do is you can get a tool that will build a dictionary of possible passwords, and it will base that dictionary on a website. So you would point it at, I don't know, Bank of Montreal. And then all the terms and the words that appear anywhere on BMO's site, it's going to pull in, and then it's going to compile a dictionary. So if people are using passwords that are based on, products within that company or technologies or anything that would appear on the website, then those will be the things that you guess first, as opposed to just guessing general kind of passwords. So we call that password profiling. So that's another kind of tool to automate this process. Okay, social networking. Another thing that you can learn about it is, let's say that you go to LinkedIn, you find out sort of who the people are in the company, sort of what the org chart is and things like that. You figure out the administrator that's going to be sitting at the desk when you walk in as the fake IT person. Okay. Then you go and you look on their Facebook or their Twitter or something like that, and you notice that they're on vacation. Okay, so this is something that people post a lot. They go on vacation, they take pictures, that kind of thing. It's very common thing to post on social media. And vacation plans are actually very critical for social engineering. Okay, they're one of the best pieces of information. Okay, why are vacation plans so important?
Because we have seen cases where people have posted their vacation plan and then they got their home break somebody, because people are sneaking the information and just know that people are not there in their house.
Sure. So certainly for break-ins and that kind of thing, if you know someone's on vacation, they're not watching their house. So that's one way you could profit from vacation. There's another way.
Maybe if I know you're on vacation, then I can tell someone else that I can refer you to someone, and then when they'll be reaching you, you're on vacation, so there will be a gap.
Okay, yeah, that's right. So, yeah.
Like you can say that they send you to do something, take passport or something, so they can check that they're on vacation.
Okay, sure. So when people go on vacation, they're not sitting at their desk anymore. Okay? And then what happens? So sometimes there's nobody sitting there until they get back, but most often somebody else sits there instead. Okay? So the administrator's gone. They're in wherever, somewhere nice, hopefully a warm beach somewhere. And somebody else is sitting in that desk. That person is only sits at that desk 1 week a year. Okay? It's not their job. Okay? So they're just temporarily filling in. What does that mean? A, they don't really know the rules. They don't know the protocol, right? So there's a good chance that they may bend rules that the person who normally wouldn't be there will. They don't know who the normal people are. If you come in and you're an IT person and you say, I'm an IT person from the staff, if you go to the person who sits there, they'll know that you're someone different, right? But if you go in when that person is on vacation and there's somebody else sitting there and they only sit there 1 week a year, they have no idea whether you're the normal person or not, okay? So you go in and you exploit the fact that there's somebody sort of new in that position. Then you can say, oh, hey, where's the person who normally sits there? Are they still in Cuba or whatever, right? And then now all of a sudden it looks like you know that person, right? Like you talk to them, they talk to you about the fact that they were going on vacation, and you sort of build that rapport with them, and then now you're starting to be a convincing, you're starting to have a convincing pretext for this particular attack. So vacation plans are really important because the chain of command in the company changes temporarily. So you have a temporary replacement in that job, and they don't know protocols as well. Okay, now this isn't guaranteed slam dunk. Sometimes it actually works in the flip. right? So somebody's there, they're temporary, they're going to follow the protocol to the T because they don't want to mess up this job, right? And sometimes talking to the actual person who's there might be more flexible in terms of bending rules. Okay, so there's no guarantee here, but anyways, it is something that you can look at. It's a window of opportunity where something's a little different. There's a little difference in terms of the chain of command, and you have someone that's maybe extra vulnerable to a social engineering attack because they're sort of in a temporary position, not doing their normal day-to-day job. Along the same lines, other things that sort of shift around is sometimes you have like different, sort of disruption to the company itself. So construction is a very good one. So if there's renovations that are happening, people aren't where they normally are. They're in a different building. They're in different floors of the building. Doors that are normally locked are just left unlocked and sort of ajar because construction workers have to go in and out of the site. And so you might not even need to show any sort of identity or something like that to get into the site. You might be able to, it might be like the one time in a year that you're able to just walk in. So construction, you can also like create temporary disruptions, like pull the fire alarm or something like that. These don't tend to work as well, but. Okay. Another thing you can look at are the interests of employees. So what are they interested in? So for example, if I know that you're really into whatever, soccer, you're really into the Montreal Impact, and maybe I want to fish you, then maybe I'll write some email that has something to do with it, or there's some, I'll ask you, could you take the survey? It's in PDF form. The PDF is malicious. I just really need you to open that PDF. And I say that, I'll give you tickets to the Montreal Impact or whatever if you complete this survey. Okay, it's a valuable use of your time, and so this will sort of be the reward. Okay, and then people are maybe more likely to click it because they actually want the tickets to that game, or they want, a gift certificate to a particular restaurant that they happen to really like, that type of thing. Okay. It also works when you're just making small talk with people. So if you go in and you're talking with the administrator, if you sort of, if you know they have kids and you ask about their kids, or that the other person's on vacation, it can build credibility and it can build rapport with the other person as well. And you won't know that unless if you do background research. Okay, this is sort of less of an attack vector now because it's been so well publicized. But it used to be that maybe 10, 20 years ago, companies threw out all sorts of stuff in the garbage. Okay, so like documents that they were working on, drafts of documents. You can learn a lot about company information. You can learn about their financial position. You can learn about, the names of people are on the documents as well and their positions, so you can learn about the org chart. And so there's a lot you can learn by just sort of going through the garbage and seeing what gets thrown out. Now most firms will use secure shredding, or they'll have it as a service. So they'll put all their boxes to be shredded, or all their papers to be shredded in a box, and then some company will come in and actually shred it for them. So companies are more sensitive to this now, but it used to be the case that there was all sorts of things. So company data, bills, so you can figure out who their contractors are. People might print out like even username passwords. Okay, so that's information gathering. Pretexting. Okay, pretexting, very fancy way of just saying that you're pretending to be someone you're not. Okay, so you adopt some pretext. The goal of the pretext is sort of to get you in proximity of what you want. Okay, the pretext often won't get you exactly what you want. You have to use persuasion or elicitation to get actually what you want, but the pretext will get you close. Okay, so it will get you in the door, talking to the right person, that kind of thing. There's all sorts of different pretexts that are available. There's a textbook. I wish I had the citation for it. I'll try and add it to the notes. But there's a nice little kind of chart of a bunch of different pretexts that I'll paste in. Okay, so there's different things you can do. I won't go through all of them. I'll just give you some of the main ones. So internal IT support is really important. That's probably a lot of attacks. You want access to the company infrastructure. You want access to the server rooms. Then you're going to turn it into a technical attack on the company itself. IT is the best way to get it. So if you show up and you look like someone that's an IT support worker, then you have a good chance of getting into the system itself. You can pretend to be another employee. So this works either on the phone or in person. Usually on the phone, you can just call up and be like, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm over at HR, I really need this information, or whatever the case may be. You can spoof phone numbers, that kind of thing, to make it look like it's an internal call coming from an extension, not coming from an external phone number. Or maybe you do social engineering to get into an office that has a phone. So for example, let's say that you are sort of a cleaner, janitor, that kind of thing. So maybe you get access to an office, and then when you're in there, you have access to the phone. Then you call someone else impersonating to be the person that is in that office. So there's ways of layering your pretext attacks. You can be like some sort of external authority figure. So like you might show up and say that you're the fire inspector for the office. And so you need to inspect all the rooms or that type of thing, and they may open rooms up. Pest control, that kind of thing. You can pretend to be, a salesperson, potential customer, or journalist, just to sort of get people talking. If you want to get some information from a company, people will talk to customers for sure. They might talk to journalists in some circumstances. So anyway, this isn't necessarily comprehensive, but you can see that there's lots of different pretexts that you could use that may or may not work. Okay, so let's say you want to do a pretext. You can do it good and you can do it bad. Okay, so how do you actually do a pretext well? So the first thing is you really have to become an expert in whatever it is that you're pretexting. Okay, so if your pretext is that you're an IT support worker, you really have to know IT. Okay, you have to talk like an IT person. You have to know the jargon of an IT person. All the little details matter a lot. Okay. You have to be very confident to pull it off well. Becoming an expert will help you be more confident, but confidence is important. The second thing is you have to think about how's this conversation going to go. Okay, so I'm going to walk up to a desk and I'm going to be like, I'm so and so from the IT firm. I really need access to the server room. There's this reason why there's this emergency. The CEO is asking me to fix it right away. It's people are offline and they can't connect. Whatever. It's really urgent. Okay. Then what you need to do is you have to think about what's the other person going to say. Okay, and you don't know what it is. So what you need to do is you have to enumerate all the things that they could say. They could say yes, they could say no, they could say no for this reason, no for this reason, and then you have to think about what's my reaction to it. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to prepare a sort of kind of flow of what the conversation might look like. What are all the different possible conversations that you might have, and what's your plan depending on what they say. Okay, so they may say 5 things in response. What are you going to say for each of these 5 things? Okay, now you don't want to like literally memorize a script because then it will sound kind of robotic and scripted. So that won't lend well to your pretext. But what you do want to do is you want to plan for all the possible things. Okay, so you sort of script out possible conversations. Don't memorize. You won't always get what you want. Okay, so sometimes it just won't work. So you have to think about, when do I leave? When do I just give up and realize that this isn't going to happen? And leaving without them knowing that it was a pretext is sort of the goal, right? If you leave and they don't know it was a pretext, then you can try again. Okay. If you maintain a pretext, you're effectively lying. What we know from the psych literature is that lying takes work. Your brain doesn't like lying, okay? So it's sort of cognitively demanding of your brain in order to maintain a lie, in order to maintain a pretext, okay? Your brain has kind of limited bandwidth, and so all the mental energy that you're spending focused on maintaining this pretext and not blowing it, that's cognitive resources that you aren't using for other things, like actually thinking about the conversation that's happening, right? Or if people are telling you information, actually retaining that information and remembering that information, okay? And so you have to take this into consideration, or social engineers have to take this into consideration. So what they might do is, for example, they might record the conversation. Then they don't have to worry about remembering the details, right? They just have to get the person to say the details, then they leave, and then that's fine. This is for elicitation, if details are what you want. And social engineers will think hard about what pretext they're going to choose, because some of them are kind of more demanding than others, okay? So let's say the IT one actually could be quite demanding, especially if you show up and the person there knows about IT, and maybe they have a specific problem. They're like, oh great, I was waiting for you to come because I have this problem with my computer. Can you look at it? And then once you resolve this problem for me, then I'll let you in the server room so you can do your job, kind of thing, right? Now all of a sudden you actually have to do IT work, right? And if you are like, I don't know what's going on, I don't know the name of like the system that you just referenced, then you're going to blow your cover. Okay, so social engineers choose pretexts that require less thinking on your feet. The final thing that social engineers are aware of is that little details matter a lot. So a lot of times, let's think of it in the flip. Let's say a social engineer goes in and they don't do a good job of this pretext, okay? So the other person's kind of suspicious, right? Often the other person can't really put their finger on why. They're not sure why. It's not like, it's not obvious to them. It's just like something seems kind of off with this person, okay? This person's coming in, there's something that's just not right. It doesn't seem right, okay? And it's sort of this conscious, right? Now, if the social engineer does a really bad job, then maybe there'll be a conscious reason why the person doesn't believe them. But usually, they sort of get tipped off by some subtle details, okay, that are different to sort of put your finger on, okay? And so it's really important for the social engineer that they consider basically all the little details that they can, right? So like the clothes that they wear. So for example, if it's a uniform or something like that, that can be an important detail. The equipment that you carry. How the social engineer talks. Okay. Do they use jargon? Do they use technical terms, right, that are consistent with this particular pretext? Is there some locality to this pretext, right? Am I expecting that somebody is local, right? Do they have a local accent, right? Or am I expecting someone who's not local, who's international? Do they have the right international accent? So little details about how you talk, the inflection of your voice, those kinds of things. Yeah, so anyways, any little kind of detail that just sort of seems off could be enough to at least make the person uncomfortable. Then they're less likely to give in to the persuasion that you're trying to elicit. Okay, the final thing is you have a pretext, it's good, it's a believable pretext, whatever. That still doesn't necessarily get you what you want. Okay, you still have to ask for what you want. Okay, you want access to the server room. You look like an IT person. They're not just going to open the door because you're an IT person. You have to ask for it. Okay, so that's influence. So influence is that basically asking for what you want. Before you ask for what you want, you have to know what you want. So it's important that you spend some time thinking about what exactly is your goal. Put some planning into achieving that goal. Have contingency plans. So if things go wrong, what's your sort of contingency plan? At what point do you just abandon it and walk away? And the other thing I'll just repeat is that you can exploit disruption. So disruption could be people on vacation, construction, that kind of thing. Okay, so influence is broken into two subcategories. One of them is elicitation. I want to get some information from you. The other one is persuasion. So I want to persuade you to do something. Okay, so in elicitation, you basically want to get information that shouldn't be disclosed to you. Okay, so what are the techniques that a social engineer will use to try and elicit information from someone else? Okay, so the first technique that they tend to use is they'll try and build what's called a rapport. with you. Okay, so what they'll do is they'll try and find some common interests. They'll make you like them as a person, make small talk, all of that kind of stuff goes into building a rapport. You're more likely to reveal information to someone you like than someone that you don't like, for example. So you want to get the target to like you. The social engineer will express mutual interests. They'll give compliments. People like to be complimented, for example. So they'll appeal to the target's ego. One technique that's sometimes successful, but you have to be a little careful doing it, is sometimes you actually deliberately say something that's wrong. So the social engineer will say, they'll misstate a fact, and it's actually very hard if you know that somebody just told you something that's wrong not to correct them. Right? So if I want to know, I don't know, some sales figure or something like that, I'll say like, oh, the sales figures were blah, blah, blah. And you'll be like, no, they weren't. They were actually this kind of thing. Okay. And then you just revealed actually that information. Okay. So sometimes the social engineer will purposely misstate a fact to be corrected. And then what they're really getting is that correction. Okay. That's the information that they want. At the same time, it looks like you might not know what you're talking about, so you have to use this carefully. So it needs to be consistent with your pretext, that the pretext that you adopt, that person would be the type of person to misstate a fact. Another thing is sometimes you might not want to share information. So you know sort of internally that this is information that you shouldn't go around telling to everyone. Okay, it's sort of privileged information, insider information. But if a social engineer comes up to you and they can sort of establish that they might already know that information, okay, then you're more likely to share it. Okay, so first off, if they just tell you the information, then you know that they know it, but they're trying to get that information from you, so they can't do that. Okay? But what they can do is tell you all sorts of information that would imply that they would also know that piece of information. Right? So if they know all sorts of insider sort of proprietary details, then you might assume that, oh, they already know about this other thing, so they're a safe person to talk about this particular information with. Okay? So this is where information gathering can help. The social engineer will gather as much information, especially like proprietary sort of insider information, and then they'll go around sort of telling it to other people so that people assume that, well, they're sort of in the know, and then they're more likely to reveal information that that person doesn't know. Okay? So it's a way to build up information for the social engineer. Another thing the social engineer might do is they might want to gravitate you towards a particular conversation. Okay, so I don't know, they want to get maybe they're just trying to get someone's vacation plans or something like that. They're trying to learn what your vacation plans are, because then that's going to help them later for their particular attack. So that's not a very ambitious goal. It's just something that's going to try and elicit that information. And so what they might do is they might, instead of just coming out right and asking for what they want, they'll just sort of sprinkle the conversation with vacation, the idea of vacation. They'll sort of frame the conversation around it. They'll get you thinking about a vacation, okay? And then once you get thinking about it, then you're more likely to volunteer that information, okay? So the idea is to preload their thought pattern with a particular thing that you want to know. And so if you preload it, then you can, it's more likely that they might just disclose it to you anyways. So if I don't know, I really want to go for sushi, and so when I wake up in the morning, I talk to my wife about, I don't know, Japan or something like that, just to sort of sprinkle that idea without actually explicitly saying it, right? And then maybe later I send her an article, and there happens to be a picture, and there's like kind of sushi in the background. It has nothing to do with sushi, but it's just like, I don't know, people that are saying they're eating sushi, but the article is about something else, right? And so I'm preloading her to think about sushi, and then at 6 p.m. I'm like, hey, I'm really craving sushi, and she's sort of like, yeah, I am too. I don't know how that happened. Okay, so that's the idea of preloading people's thought processes with something. Okay, and then the final piece of it is persuasion. Okay, so in persuasion, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the target to do something for you. As opposed to reveal something to you, you want them to actually get them to do something. Generally, that requires their authorization. That's why they're the target. Okay, so first off, we already talked about building a rapport, so that also works here. So if the social engineer gets you to like them, then you're more likely to be persuaded by what they want. Empathy works too, right? So you show up and you're like, I have a job interview. Something really bad happened this morning. Like, I don't know, I was late getting out the door, and I don't know, my kids, it was a disaster, and there's traffic and all this stuff, and I'm really panicked, and I wasn't able to print my CV off. Could you please I have it on a USB stick. Can you just take that USB stick, plug it into your computer, and print it? That would be really, really helpful to me, okay? And so if the person is empathetic, then they might be like, okay, sure, I'm willing to do that favor. Meanwhile, the USB stick has some malware or something like that on it. The other thing that's maybe a little hard to do, but if you can build indebtedness, can't even say that word. So basically, if you do someone a favor, they're more likely to return that favor. Right. So you walk in, and I don't know, you really want them to print off your CV. You see that they're not really working. They're on Facebook, and you say, hey, your boss is like coming down the hall. You probably shouldn't be on Facebook, right? And then they close down the Facebook, their boss walks in, and then now they're sort of indebted to you, right? You sort of did them a favor, and so when you ask them to print out your CV, then they're maybe more likely to actually print it out. Another thing, it's a general sales tactic, is you ask for more than you want. Okay, so you want something, you ask for a lot more, and then when they say no, you say, well, would you do a little less, a little less, a little less, and eventually they might concede. and if they might concede to exactly what you wanted in the first place. Okay, so you ask for more than what you want, and then you sort of compromise when the answer is no, and then you reach a sort of middle ground. But all along, the middle ground is actually what you wanted. Yeah.
How would you frame that? How would you start by asking them something if
Yeah, so you might say, okay, I'm an IT person. I lost my pass to the server room. Can you give me a pass? And they'll be like, no, we can't hand that out. And then be like, okay, no problem. Maybe you could just let me in. I'll quickly do my job, and then next time I'll get the pass situation sorted out, right? So you were never intending to actually get the pass, but the temporary access was a sort of that was the concession, right? And so that might be more effective than if you just go up and say, can I have temporary access, right? Because they said no once, and then now they might say yes to the sort of concession. That makes sense? Yeah. Okay, the final thing that social engineers will do is they'll try and manipulate your emotions. Okay, so you're more likely to respond to persuasion under certain circumstances. It depends a lot on the person, so it's not going to work on everyone's, and it might have the exact opposite effect. Okay, you never know. But for example, we saw in the video from last class that the social engineers, they created a sort of anxiety, right? So the person, they were trying to get the pin from the woman, and they created this sort of, situation where she was really anxious. Okay, because she was anxious, maybe she wasn't thinking as clearly, and so they were able to manipulate her better in that scenario because they invoked those emotions. Okay, so social engineer could use really any emotion. Like I said, you don't necessarily know what will work, but it could be fear, could be anger, coercion, anxiety. Okay. Once again, I mean, almost everything here is highly unethical, right? So once again, I'll say you should not go in and do it. This also is, right? So let's say your job is actually as a social engineer, so you get hired by a firm. You have to negotiate with the firm itself what the kind of ground rules are for your pen test. So this might be like completely off the table in terms of things that you might do. So attackers do it, but sort of ethical hackers or social engineers that are hired won't generally use these tactics. Okay, so those are the main sort of categories of attack. Is there any questions about those? Otherwise, I'll move on to some stories. Yep.
So, do we know what percentage of attacks in this current in current scenario do we have with social engineering versus non-social engineering?
I don't know numbers. So the industry doesn't tend to publish those numbers. I've been at, for example, banks, large banks in Canada, and they've told me that I don't know what the exact numbers are, but something like maybe 80% of the attacks are social engineering based, and 20% are sort of technical. And then they usually follow it up and say that we have 3 floors full of security people that are handling the technical side, and we have 2 people in the whole company that deal with social engineering, right? And so that's a sort of typical scenario, right? So with a bank, it's like someone calling up, pretending to be someone they're not to get access to an account. They're not actually the account holder, right? So that would be a typical social engineering attack against a bank. Yeah.
Because my impression was it's most of the attacks is done under the shadows of anonymity, but it is the other way. What in real, it's 80% of it.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes the attacks are kind of the most bold or brazen, right? Where someone actually walks into your company and does something, right? Yeah. Other questions, comments? Yeah.
How do we know that we have collected enough information for a pretext?
Sorry, say again. How do we know that we have?
Collected enough information for a pretext.
So you don't maybe ever have enough. So you just have to decide that you're sort of comfortable with the amount of information that you've gathered. So social engineers will sort of they might sit down and actually plan out conversations before they actually do the conversation, and then they'll see like sort of the types of topics that come up, and then they might realize, oh, I actually don't know anything about that. Like if this person says this, then I can't really respond to that. So then they might go and try and gather more information, right? And sometimes they might just wing it or something like that. Other questions? Okay, all right. So next we'll move on to story time, but it is actually kind of a logical break. So why don't we take our 10-minute break a little early, and then I'll just tell you a bunch of stories for the rest of the class. Okay, so the first story starts with this company. Once upon a time, there was a company called RSA. You might have heard of them. RSA is the name of a very famous cryptographic algorithm, and there was a company that was formed at the same time, and they offer all sorts of security services. I believe when we talked about passwords and alternatives to passwords, we talked about their kind of flagship product, which is this RSA token. Okay, so the RSA token, if you recall, so I'll just note that we're talking about the company, not the algorithm. And their flagship product is the RSA token. Okay, so the RSA token is something that you have. It usually looks like a little dongle that you put on your keychain, kind of like a USB key. And on it, at any given time, there's a number. Okay, and the number changes. A random number, thank you. Okay, so there's some number that appears on it. Okay, and so the idea is that if you're going to log into a website that is supporting these RSA tokens, so the website is set up to support it, you'll put in your username, you'll put in your password, and additionally you'll put in the particular number that it happens to appear. Okay, the web server is going to check whether your password is correct. So they maintain a database of correct passwords. If it is correct, then as an extra security step, what they'll do is they'll buzz over to an RSA server, or maybe it's a server that they run, but we'll just say that this is hosted actually by the company RSA, and they'll send this number. And the server is going to say, usually they'll have to send the user, when the username, they'll map it to like an identifier or something like this. But they're basically going to say, is this the number that should be on this token that we manufactured at this specific time? Okay, so is this correct or not? Okay, and if everything is correct, then the user gets logged in. How does RSA, the company, know what number is appearing on this particular device at any given time? So what happens is they basically go through a sequence of random numbers. Okay, they use something called the pseudo-random number generator. It's from cryptography. If you take 6110, you'll learn about it. It doesn't really matter. The point is that they know the sequences of numbers. They manufactured this, so they set it up with a certain number sequence, and then they set it to update every 10 minutes, let's say. And so they just need to know what time it is and what the actual token is itself, and then they'll know what number should be appearing on that. Okay, and then they'll take into account if there's a little bit of time lag or something like that. Then if you don't report the exact number, but maybe one from like 4 numbers ago or 5 numbers in the future, then they'll sort of adjust for that lag. But if the number is completely wrong, then they won't let you log in. Okay, so what that means is that RSA basically has sitting on their server, they have every number that's on an RSA token in the world. Okay, at least for all the people that use RSA for it. Okay, and so if you were able to breach RSA server, if you were able to infiltrate it, you could grab that file, okay, and then now you would be able to compromise every RSA token in the world that's using that server. Okay, so that's the sort of consequences of this. And so, well, I'll just jump to the punchline. So an adversary was able to do this. Okay, so an attacker stole this file. With all RSA token sequences. So it's actually really small because they're sort of generated pseudo-randomly from a small number, so you just have to steal the seed itself. But anyways, it's also possible that this server sets up their own private server. But anyways, a lot of them just use RSA itself. Okay, so what's the end consequence of this? Can you log into any account? Well, no, you still have the password. So the password still protects the account. But basically what you've done effectively is you've reduced two-factor authentication. I have to know the password and I have to have this token to one-factor authentication, which is just that I need to know this password. Okay, so that's the consequence of the attack. So it reduces two-factor authentication to one-factor authentication. And we know that passwords are weak. Okay, so you might guess passwords. Okay, we also seem to think or conjecture that if people have an RSA token, they think that that's extra secure, so they might choose a weaker password. Okay, because they have this fancy random number that they're typing in every time. So who cares if my password's dog, right? So anyway, that's a conjecture. We don't know if that's true, but it's reasonable that that might actually be true. Okay, so this is a sort of big deal. Okay, so the adversary did it, and it was a big deal. It was all over the news. It hurt RSA as a company. They were able to recover from it. They had to reissue all the tokens. A lot of military, U.S. government types of things. Those are the kinds of people that use this. So they were all sort of compromised in terms of two-factor authentication. So this was a big deal. Okay, RSA is also a security company. Right? They deal in security. They host a big security conference. That's one of the biggest industrial conferences for security. Okay, so how did someone fool RSA and were able to infiltrate this particular server? And so it turns out that it all started with an email. Okay, so what happened is the adversary just sent an email. The recipients of this malicious email were sort of logical recipients of an email. So we refer to this as spear phishing. So when you think of phishing, it's like some crazy, scheme that you would never fall for, full of typos, that kind of thing. Okay, this was a very specifically crafted email. And so all the people that were CC'd on this email, they are people who normally send files amongst themselves. Okay, they all worked in the same division. It was very natural. It was all their real email addresses. Okay, so it was sent to real people who actually really work together. So you might think of them as sort of natural recipients of this kind of email. The email was spoofed to look like it came from someone that worked at the company. So they spoofed the from address. Okay. the email had an attachment. So the attachment was called 2011 recruitment plan. That's when this happened. .xsl. What's XSL? Okay, so this is Excel spreadsheet. If someone emails you an Excel sheet, is that generally safe to open? Okay, so it's not like someone just emailed you a .exe file, right, that's going to execute on your computer. So Excel, you think of probably as sort of a passive data file, right? It's just displaying content like an MP3 file or something like that. It's not actually running code, okay? If you think that, you're wrong. So it turns out that Excel, in Microsoft's brilliant wisdom, they overload, Adobe does this too, they overload their products with all sorts of things. And one of the capabilities of Excel that's not used that often, but is sitting, or at least it used to sit in Excel, was the ability to have active content. Okay. In particular, what you could do is you could embed Flash. Okay, and then this would go and it would find Flash on your computer and it would start executing it. Okay, now this was a high-profile attack. Okay, and so the adversaries had what's called a zero-day vulnerability. Zero-day means that the first time anyone ever saw it was in this email. Okay, no one had seen it before. So they had found some vulnerability, presumably in Flash itself. And so this Excel file was a vector to get a malicious Flash script, and then it exploited the Flash that was on that person's computer, and it gave the adversary, we don't know all the details, but I'll just sort of presume that it gave it root access to that particular computer, so super user access to that computer. So it has a zero-day exploit in Flash. So even if they had kept their computer up to date, latest version of Excel, latest version of Flash, all the security patches applied, latest version of Windows, all that type of stuff, a zero-day you can't defend against. Okay, it's just hasn't been seen yet. There is no security patch for it. Okay, would you believe that somebody opened this email? Of course, right? Like, if you worked at the company, you get an email that's called recruitment plan. It's actually sent from somebody at the company that you know. It CCs in all the real people in the company. It looks very innocuous. It's just a spreadsheet. How dangerous is a spreadsheet? You're going to double click on it, right? At least take a look at it, right? And as soon as you double click, then it's over. Okay. And so they were able to. So someone did actually click on it, at least one of the recipients, and it compromised the machine. These are people in HR. They're not technical as well. Okay, now this isn't the whole story. So now you've compromised some HR person's computer. How does that get you to the computer that's holding all of these seeds? So RSA, the company, didn't release details. So they had a blog post that actually outlined this attack, and they gave a lot of details. They sort of explained it up to this point. They said, yes, we fell for a spearfishing attack. And then they said that once they were sort of on the network with one compromised machine, then it turned into a technical attack where they were able to move laterally through the network and eventually reach the machine that had these secrets and exfiltrate the data from it. So the attacker, so we don't know the details of how this happened, but the attacker moved laterally. To the target server. So details weren't specified. Okay, so now the adversary is sitting on the machine. They have all of the numbers in their hand, so to speak. There's one final step that it's easy to sort of gloss over, right, and not care about, but it actually turns out to be really important, and it's something that is a bit of a hurdle. The adversary is sitting outside the network. they have access to the machine that has the data inside the network. They do have to like send that data to themselves, okay? And so that's called exfiltrating data. And if you just, I don't know, email it to yourself or something like that, like it's a lot of data, they do network monitoring. Okay, so they're going to see this unusual activity where this server is sending a lot of traffic, and there's a good chance that it just gets turned off because it looks suspicious, right? So an intrusion detection system or something like that might catch it. So the adversaries, once again, there weren't a lot of details, but the blog post explicitly mentioned that they had a very sort of sophisticated plan for how they were going to exfiltrate this data so it didn't look unusual. So the traffic patterns coming out of this network didn't trip any of the intrusion detection systems or that type of thing. Okay, and in the end, all the RSA tokens that were compromised were recalled and then reissued. Okay, so this whole attack started basically by social engineering attack, a spear phishing attack in this particular case. Yep.
How long did it take from the email to actually sending over the data?
I don't remember reading those details. I feel like it wasn't a long time. Like it was probably a matter of days, if not hours, like sort of in that time frame. There was nothing to indicate that it took them 2 years or something like that. But I don't remember reading that. Yeah, I do link to the original article so you can read it as well. But yeah.
Why they haven't disclosed how it got infiltrated from the HR's computer to their backbone, probably server? Because in principle we should disclose all the information about the vulnerability so the others don't get affected by it.
Yeah. So some companies don't disclose anything. Some companies do disclose. And so generally companies don't want to embarrass themselves, right? And so this was, I think RSA actually took this article down. So they published it and then they took it down eventually. So everyone thought it was like generous of them just to publish the amount of detail that they did publish. There is some laws now that are being passed that if you're a firm and you get compromised, especially if you lose personal information about people, you need to disclose that to the people who lost that information.
GDPR
So
recently.
yeah. So GPDR, I don't know if they have a clause specifically, but yeah, that type of law. So that's a European EU law that doesn't apply in Canada. Yeah, anyways, but yeah.
Did they reissue all the tokens or only tokens which were synced with that particular?
So it would be the ones that were synced with that server. So if people had their own private RSA style server, then I believe that those were not recalled because they didn't get the file for that. Yeah, not 100% clear, but that's my understanding of the story. Okay, example 2. Happened very close to us. Okay, so there's this thing called Bitcoin. It's a form of digital payment. I do a lot of research on it. You don't have to know the details of Bitcoin to understand this. If you want to know the details of Bitcoin, take INSE 6630, and I'll teach you all about it. Basically, Bitcoin have some value. Okay, they're worth something, and you can trade your Bitcoin for Canadian dollars, or if you have Canadian dollars and you want to buy Bitcoin, then you can buy them. Okay, the way that you do it, there's a couple ways, but the most common way is you're going to use what's called an exchange service. So this is going to be a website. Someone will set it up, and so here's Alice, and she has some Canadian dollars. What she's going to do is she's going to move, using the banking system, those Canadian dollars to the exchange. And then say Bob's here, and Bob has some Bitcoin. He'll move the Bitcoin to the exchange. So the exchange is in possession of Bob's Bitcoin and Alice's Canadian dollars. And then if they want to swap them, then the exchange will execute that swap. And then you can withdraw so Bob can withdraw his new Canadian dollars and Alice can withdraw her her original Bitcoin. Okay, so the point of this is this exchange is a web service. It's like a website. That means it's running somewhere. There is a literal server somewhere in the world that is running this exchange service, okay? So in the case of this Bitcoin exchange, it was being run out of Ottawa. So there was a server. And it was being hosted, not privately, it was in a data center. So it was in an Ottawa data center. Data center's called Granite Networks. And it's owned by Rogers. Okay, the next thing is Bitcoin is the Bitcoin side of things. Bitcoin are like, it's like digital money. Right, so it's like that digital money is actually sitting on the server. So everybody who moved Bitcoin to the server in order to exchange their money, it's actually sitting on that computer. So if you can break into that computer, you can steal all the Bitcoin that's sitting on that computer. That's effectively what happens. So technically, it's signing keys over the accounts that hold the Bitcoin, not the Bitcoin itself, but these are small technical details that don't really matter. Now, most exchanges know that this is a huge risk. So what they'll do is they won't, because a lot of people, everyone doesn't show up and withdraw their Bitcoin at the same time. Usually a lot of people will let it sit on there for a day or a month or a year or something like that. So usually what they do is they take their Bitcoin, they kind of split it into two piles. One pile is going to be sitting on the server, so anyone who wants to withdraw right away, they get it. So this is called the hot wallet. And they'll take most of it, like say 80% or whatever fraction they want, and they'll put it offline. Okay, so they'll print it out on a piece of paper and store it in a safety deposit box, or they'll put it on a USB key, or they'll do 5 of those things, whatever the case may be. Okay, so it's split between an online hot wallet and an offline cold wallet or cold storage. Okay, so this server didn't have, it wasn't like all the Bitcoin on the exchange was sitting on this server, but there was a substantial amount. So it was 100K worth of Bitcoin in this particular case. Okay, so the server is sitting at Granite Networks. What that means is that the people who run the exchange, they don't have access to the server. Okay, so if they need access to their server, it's in a locker in this data center. So they have to show up, for example, and when they show up, they have to ask for access. They have to authenticate, that kind of thing, and then they'll be granted access to the locker that actually holds this server. Okay. The other thing is that sometimes you need things that are going to be done, but they could maybe be done remotely. So what happened is the adversary basically connected to Granite Networks, and they the website or the hosting service had a web chat support team. So you could just open a little chat window with support, and then you can say whatever you want, and somebody who works for Granite Networks that's on site is on the other end of that web chat. Okay, and so in this case, the adversary pretends to be the exchange. Okay, they're not actually the exchange, but they pretend to be the exchange, and they want the support person, to basically give them access to the server. Okay. So they use a pretext of being the owner of the exchange. And they ask for virtual access. Okay. And in this case, the security policy, it seems, so I'm sort of combing this from newspaper articles, but it seems like it was very laxed. So basically, because they showed up, they knew the real name of a business that was really located at that particular exchange. That seemed to convince the person enough. Okay, we don't know the exact extent of the conversation. All we know is that at the end of the day, that support person was convinced that they were talking to the real owner of this exchange. So it didn't seem there was any real authentication. But they had this sort of insider knowledge, even though it's not really that inside, that this service was being hosted by this company. Okay, the details are a little hazy about what exactly they tried to do. But anyways, at the end of the day, from the newspaper article, the support person walked to the locker that had the server. They put the server into safe mode. Apparently that's what the people were asking for. Safe mode is a debugging mode. Most operating systems allow you to do it. It turns off a lot of security features. Okay, so there's all sorts of security things that run at the operating system level, and so safe mode is kind of like the minimal mode where you don't run your entire platform, you run the most basic services. And so a lot of security services are disabled in safe mode. And then apparently they also plugged a laptop into the server. This is like a direct quote from the newspaper article. Yeah, into the server.
Can a person sitting in front of chat window do that?
Sorry, so the support person did this. Is that your question, or?
Yes.
Yeah. So the person on the support end plugged their laptop into this computer for some reason. So anyways, all of this taken together, the adversary was able to steal all the Bitcoin. Then the company found out. They went to the press. There was some press about it. I don't know what the end result is. It seems that maybe the host is somehow liable for this data. I'm not sure exactly if there were legal actions that were pursued or what the outcome of this was. But this did actually happen. Okay. Let me tell you one more story because I'm kind of fading here. I'm not feeling very well. So this will be the last one. And then I'll tell you some more next class. So this one I actually have sort of in slide form. Okay, in this particular story is about this guy. His name's Matt Honan. He's a reporter. He writes for like Wired magazine and a couple other magazines. Okay, and the story is really actually about his Twitter handle, which is @Matt. So that's a very, on Twitter, especially before when you only have 140 characters and the username counts, right? Having short usernames are sort of in demand. People like having short usernames, and he was like one of the very first people to use Twitter, and so he has this very desirable Twitter handle, okay? And so it decides that somebody in the world wants access to that Twitter handle, okay? So they're going to try and use an attack to get it. So the story sort of goes like this, and he wrote the whole story up for Wired. Really interesting. You should read it. He ends up actually talking to the person who hacked him. So they actually exchange some details, and the person sort of explains to him how they were able to actually conduct the attack. Okay, so this is the basic story. So they go to Twitter, and they say, "I'm Matt Honan. I want to reset my password." Okay, and Twitter says, "Great, no problem. Sorry you lost your password. We're happy to reset it for you. We just need one thing. We're going to send a recovery email. We're going to send it to the Gmail account that we have on file for you." Okay, there'll be a link in that Gmail account, in that email. If you click on it, then you can reset your password. Okay, problem is the adversary doesn't have access to the Gmail account. Okay, that's Matt Honan's Gmail account. So what does the adversary do? What do you think they do? Say it louder. Okay, so they go over to Google, who hosts Gmail, and they say, "Hi Google, I'm Matt Honan at gmail.com. I lost my password." Okay, and so Google says, "No problem. Sorry that you lost your password. We'll go ahead and reset that for you. The way that we're going to reset your password is we see that you have this Me account, and we're going to send an email to it. It's listed as your recovery account. What's Me? Anyone know? Anyone old enough to know? Okay, so it was Apple's really failed attempt at doing social media a long time ago. Okay, so it's basically an Apple service that's no longer in effect. Okay, so anyways, that was his email account. The adversary doesn't have access to this email account. Okay, what do? Okay, so now you know the story. So they go over to Apple. Okay, and they say, "Apple, I have this Me account. I would like to reset the password." Okay. Now there's actually something special about Apple. It's no longer as special about Apple, but this story is from years ago, and so it was special about Apple at that time. Apple had a whole bunch of services, including things like iTunes, and in particular, you often paid Apple money. So with Twitter, you didn't really pay them money. Back then, you didn't really pay Google money either. But Apple, you paid money. You gave them credit cards and that kind of thing. So it was a different kind of service. And one thing that Apple offered that Google didn't and Twitter probably didn't is they had a phone number. Okay, so instead of going and resetting your password through the website, you get on the phone and you call 1-800-Apple support or whatever it is, and you say, "Hi there, I'd like to reset my password, my iCloud password or my Apple password, and for this particular email account." Okay. So Apple says the story's a little different now, okay? Because Apple is a financial company, they accept transactions. Matt Honan had paid Apple for something at some point, and so they had a credit card on file. So when the person called up, they said, "Okay, no problem. This is what we need from you. We need your username." So the adversary knew it because I think Google displayed it, or at least it was, you could easily find his email address because he had it on his website or something like that. They needed the billing address. Okay, where does Matt Honan live? Well, it turns out that Matt Honan had a personal domain, and when you register for a personal domain, once again 10 years ago, you actually list your home address, and it's on the internet for everyone to see in this thing called Whois. So there is this Whois record now, because it was a problem with identity theft. Now Whois tends to be guarded. So they won't reveal your home address. But back in the day when you registered a domain, you basically put your address. Okay, so this person just went to Whois. They said Whois, matthonan.com or whatever his email was. His home address was sitting there. They gave it to the person over the phone. They said, "Great, that's exactly right. That's your billing address. We think you're Matt Honan now. But we have one last thing that we need from you. That's the last 4 digits of your credit card." Okay, now the adversary's stuck. Okay, the adversary doesn't know the last 4 digits of Matt Honan's credit card. Okay, and so anyways, then they get thinking, and they're like, they decide, okay, well, we've used Twitter, we've used Google, we've used Apple. Who else can we rope into this story? Oh yeah, by the way, so they knew the username, the billing address, they didn't know the credit card. So they decide, well, let's go over to Amazon. Okay, so they go over to Amazon and they say, "I'm Matt Honan, and they basically they want to get the last 4 digits of Matt Honen's credit card number from his Amazon account because Amazon has it. Okay. Now, Amazon won't give him that information. When he shows up and says, "Hi, I'm Matt Honen," basically they ask for the exact same information. They say, "Okay, great. What's your username? What's your billing address? What's the last 4 digits of your credit card?" So he knows the username, knows the billing address. I say he, we don't know, but the adversary knows. Sorry, the adversary is either he or she, we don't know. The adversary does not know the last 4 digits of the credit card. Okay, no problem. So this is what the adversary does that's really clever. What they do is they hang up. They call Amazon back and they say, "I'm Matt Honen and I just got a new credit card and I want to add it to my account." Okay, I want to add my new credit card number to my account. And it turns out that Amazon, they don't want to give out people's personal information. If you try and reset your password or anything like that, they don't want to do that for you. But if you show up and you're like, "I'm going to spend more money with you and I'm going to give you more credit card details," they're like, "Great," right? Like, we don't care. So they did no verification, really. They basically are like, "Okay, what's the username? Give me that credit card number. I'll add it to your file right away." Okay, so they just needed the basic account information. So the adversary added a second credit card to the account. Okay, then they went to Amazon, hung up, called back, and said, "Okay, I want to reset my Amazon password." And Amazon said, "Okay, I need the username, the billing address, and the last 4 digits of your credit card number." So the adversary knows the username. They know the billing address. Do they know the last 4 digits of the original credit card? No. But wait, they just added a credit card number to the account. They know the last 4 digits of that credit card, which is on the account. And so they just tell the last 4 digits of that credit card. And Amazon's like, "Great. You must be Matt Honen. You know all of these details. We'll go ahead and we'll reset that password for you." Okay. So then the adversary broke into Amazon. So the adversary hasn't gone into Twitter yet, but they at least got into Amazon. So once they're in Amazon, they go to manage credit cards, and they see a screen that says, "Okay, you have 2 credit cards that are registered." And Amazon's not going to show you the whole credit card number, right? It's going to be asterisk, 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 but they'll show you the last 4 digits just so that you know which one's which. Turns out that's all you really need, okay? So then what does he do, or she? Okay, so then they go back to Apple and they say, "I'm Matt Honen. I would like to reset my account. Here's my username, here's my billing address, and now I actually know the last 4 digits of the original credit card, which is on file with Apple." And Apple's like, "Great, we'll reset that password." They log into Apple, they get that recovery email from Gmail, they reset the Gmail password, and they get the recovery email that's in Gmail from Twitter, and now they own @Matt. Okay, so it's a really good story. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually end here. So what the adversary decided to do is they also thought that they should cover their tracks. Okay, so what happened is as they kind of moved back up through all these services, they decided that they should delete things so there isn't a trace. Okay, so for example, when they logged into Matt Honen's Gmail account, they deleted everything that was in the account. Okay, all his email was gone. All his email contacts were gone. He's a reporter, so he has stories that he's working on. He had drafts of stories that were kind of saved in email form. He had all the contact information. All of that is gone. Okay, so he loses access to it. When the adversary moved through Apple, Apple had this feature, really great feature, that if you ever lose your iPhone, you can wipe the device remotely. Okay, if you wipe it remotely, then whoever has possession of it, they can't break in and steal whatever's on your iPhone. Okay, so this is in the forgot my iPhone. So the adversary also did that. So his phone, his iPad, all his Apple sort of devices were wiped. Okay, and then the final thing is that Apple, they love this like Find My iPhone thing. They thought it was really cool, and so for a very short period of time, they actually put it on laptops as well, and it was enabled by default. So it actually turns out that Matt Honen's laptop was also subscribed to this service from Apple, and so the adversary was able to remotely wipe his entire laptop. And when he did that, he lost everything. Think about everything that's on your laptop. You know, pictures of your kids, pictures of, you know, your wedding, whatever, all your documents, everything you need, all of that. It was just gone, okay? And all of it was gone because the adversary wanted @Matt at Twitter. And so anyway, so Matt Honan ends up talking to the adversary. He kind of reaches out to him through the Twitter account because he now controls the Twitter account. And then they have this sort of conversation about it, and then he writes a story about it. But anyway, so the lesson here is, the social engineering's kind of complicated, especially when you move from service to service. Different services have different policies. In this case, you were able to exploit what I would call an escalation of privilege because you were able to add a credit card easier than you were able to reset a password. So that was a kind of escalation of privilege attack. And the other lesson from it is that you might think that your Twitter password is like the least important password that you own, right? It's not as bad as your banking password. You wouldn't want to lose your banking password, right? But it turns out that in this case, for @Matt, his Twitter password was really important because losing that Twitter password basically lost his entire digital life as a result of it as well. So you have to think about how much data you have that's collected in these services and what happens if tomorrow you lose access to it all. So that's the other kind of takeaway that you can take from this. So anyways, on that very positive note, let's end a little early because my voice isn't holding out, and I'll tell you some more stories next class.